welcome back to the series on Plato's Republic. We are going to be picking back up with where we left off last time, which is Book 1. We'll be finishing up Book 1. And if you recall, we were talking about rule, what makes for a good ruler, and kind of the competing views or the competing alternatives, options in Book 1 about who is to rule, who makes for a good ruler. We had the option of the many, the multitude, the plurality, and we had the option of the wealthy, the elderly, right? The you might call it in the eyes of the world, the wise, even though it might turn out that the wise isn't just equivalent with elderly with experience, because as we'll see, it's still a type of subjectivity, a type of having been ruled by another. And so what we're going to do is we're going to slowly transition into the question of what makes a ruler. That is, what makes, just as, put it this way, to talk about a baseball player, you need to know what a baseball player does, what they're supposed to be doing. To talk about a gardener, what makes for a good gardener, you should know, or you need to know, what gardeners are supposed to be doing. What are they for? What's the purpose of a gardener? And it might turn out, as we'll see, that a gardener is good, not necessarily because, or maybe even not even related to the question of whether or not they make money or whether or not they have a good business. A gardener, the evaluation of a gardener is based on the plants, right, that they tend to, and a gardener is good if they thrive at making their plants thrive, right? If they're good at tending to their plants, then they're a good gardener, regardless of whether there's any personal gain because of that, regardless of whether or not they get any extrinsic value out of that activity of gardening. It is sufficient for them to be a good gardener if the things that they're tending to, or you could put it in terms of ruling, the things that they rule, if they can make those things good. In this case, it's plants, right? You could think of the gardener as the one who rules over the plants, the one who tends to or takes care of the plants. They're good if the things that they rule are good, if they can make those things good. Okay, and what we see with Thrasymachus is this is a completely foreign idea for him. The idea that a ruler would be concerned with the good of its subjects as in a sense the primary focus of its activity, right? So for Thrasymachus, one would rule only to the extent that they could get something individual out of this activity. So that would be like the primary aim. So the example he uses is with being a shepherd, and the shepherd tending to the sheep. And there's a passage in here. Let's see if we can find this. Okay. So this is on pages 20 and 21. If you have the Reeve translation, otherwise it's in the Stephanus number, the margin number 343, A5, somewhere around there, and going on, you get this discussion of the shepherd. I believe that's where it's introduced, and I'll just read some of this because I think it's very fruitful to reflect on, because it makes this point that's eventually going to carry over into the context of justice, which is going to then carry over into this question that we've been asking. What's the value of morality? What's the value of ethics? What's the value of justice as such? But it's good to see some analogies to help us to answer that question. And so here's an analogy of the relation of the shepherd to the sheep. Okay, so here Thrasymachus asks, "Tell me, Socrates, do you still have a wet nurse?" And the reason he asks is because he gets really pissed off right at the front of this conversation, because he's being questioned, and he's coming to realize that he doesn't know the answer to these questions, or better put, the answer that he's giving to the questions Socrates is asking. Those answers are undermining themselves. They're kind of he realizes that he's contradicting himself. And so one thing he could do is he can admit that he was mistaken or he's wrong. The other thing he can do is he can say the whole endeavor to question is stupid, right? So when someone feels that they're getting backed into a corner, one thing they can do is they can just completely change topics and say, you're an idiot for thinking that this matters so much, for questioning me, and you tried to just blame the individual for asking the question as a way of kind of getting out of the situation. Okay, and so then Socrates goes on to respond, what is that? Shouldn't you be giving answers rather than asking such things? Thrasymachus responds, because she's letting you run around sniveling and doesn't wipe your nose when you need it, since it is her fault that you do not know the difference between sheep and shepherds. And this is, I think, an analogy between masters and slaves, between rulers and subjects, right? Between the ruling class and the ruled class, the subject class. Okay, so this is going to be an example that's going to carry over into the relation of the rulers and the ruled. Socrates goes on, what exactly is it I do not know? Thrasymachus says, you think that shepherds and cowherds consider what is good for their sheep and cattle, and fatten them and take care of them with some aim in mind other than what is good for their master and themselves. Moreover, you believe that rulers in cities, true rulers that is, think about their subjects in a different way than one does about sheep, and that what they consider night and day is something other than what is advantageous for themselves. You are so far from understanding justice that what is just and unjust and what is unjust, that you do not realize that justice is really the good of another, what is advantageous for the stronger and the ruler, and harmful to the one who obeys and serves. Injustice is the opposite. It rules those simple-minded, for that is what they really are. Just people, and the ones it rules, do what is advantageous for the other who is stronger, and they make the one they serve happy, but they do not make themselves the least bit happy. He goes on, you must consider it as follows, Socrates, or you will be the most naive of all. And then this is where I think it gets pretty telling. A just man must always get less than does an unjust one. First, in their contracts with one another, when a just man is partner to an unjust, you will never find, when the partnership ends, that the just one gets more than the unjust, but less. Okay, so one of the things to keep in mind, it looks like what's going on is that justice is what the subjects are supposed to do. The subjects are supposed to be just. The subjects, the ruled, the sheep, they're the ones that are supposed to do what someone else says, right? And so the purpose of sheep is to serve the shepherd. The purpose of plants is to serve the gardener, right? So what you get is the purpose of citizens, the purpose of society, is to serve the betterment of the ruler. And so what justice is on this view that Thrasymachus is espousing is justice is what the weak, the lowly, the simple-minded, as he calls them, it's what they're supposed to do. Namely, they're supposed to serve the higher, the high-minded, the powerful, the rulers. Okay, and what eventually this develops into at the bottom of page 21 or around 344a5 or so, what you get is Thrasymachus identifying this type of rule as tyranny, right? So this is to say, to be just is to be a subject of a tyrant, obeying the tyrant, right? So to do what's advantageous for the stronger is justice. So if there is a ruler, to do what the ruler says, that's like the purpose of justice. And so then this goes back to this question initially: what would you prefer, to be just or to be unjust? And what Thrasymachus, I think, has in mind is everyone, on his view, everyone deep down would rather be unjust. They would rather be the one that would not be the subject of rule. They would not want to be the things that are ruled, but rather they would want to be the ones doing the ruling. They would want to be the ones not subject to the law, but the ones that make the law. Another way of putting it is they would want to be beyond the law or before the law, not the ones that fall under it, not the ones that have to obey it. And so the tyrant is the unjust ruler, and they seem to be able to rule when the lower class, the weak subjects, respect or obey the tyrant. Okay, so you get a view of tyranny here right up front, which embeds justice at the service of tyranny. So it's a way of trying to say, no, there is a role for justice, but its role is in serving the tyrant, who doesn't have to be just. The tyrant doesn't have to follow any laws, because they are the lawmaker. They are the ones that decide who should do what, right? They're the ones that decide what's going to be good or what's going to be bad for the whole. And that's what a ruler is. It's the one who decides the questions of good or bad for the parts. Okay, now what we won't go into all the details, but the way that this conversation develops is Socrates eventually goes on to make this point about the necessity of wisdom, knowledge in ruling, right? You can't be a ruler if you don't have knowledge, because you might be making various laws, you might be making various policies that turn out to be contrary to your intentions, right? So if you don't have knowledge, the things that you tell people to do might actually undermine yourself. And we talked about this a little bit last time. It would be like if the person that didn't fully understand what it meant to rebel against authority meant, like if they didn't understand that and they said, okay, here's what everyone needs to do. They need to rebel against their authorities. And if that law was followed through or carried out, what it would do is it would actually undermine the very authority that individual had in pronouncing that law in the first place. And so to have knowledge seems to be a necessary precondition of being a good ruler, because otherwise you're going to, putting it pretty frankly, you're going to screw yourself over with bad laws, with bad, commands, if you don't understand and know what is good. Okay, and so there's this necessity of knowledge and wisdom if you're going to rule, which ultimately leads to this this virtue of justice, because what justice is going to be for Socrates is justice is the virtue of ruling. It's like what you need to have in order to rule well. Just as there's certain virtues of being a gardener, there are certain traits, certain habits that you need to have if you're going to garden well, if you're going to rule over your garden, rule over your plants well, you need to have certain traits. And essential to that is going to be knowledge, right? Very, very at the heart of all of this, it's going to be knowledge. And so justice, which is the virtue of ruling well, you can see is automatically going to incorporate knowledge. And it's actually going to be a type of wisdom, as we're ultimately going to see throughout this book, that to be just is going to amount to a type of wisdom. And it's going to also be a type of wisdom, or a type of knowledge, not just over yourself and rule, for yourself, but for another. And this is what is somewhat paradoxical in what Socrates says in response to Thrasymachus and his example of the sheep, namely that to be a ruler, by definition, is not to be a tyrant. So there's something self-contradictory about a tyrant. A tyrant is in reality, according to Socrates, not a ruler. Tyrants don't rule. And the reason for that is because they are not concerned with their subjects. To be a ruler, by definition, Socrates is suggesting, is to be concerned with your subjects, the people that you're ruling. And this is similar to going back to the example of the gardener. To be a gardener requires not just focusing on how much profit you're going to make, which farmers markets you should go to, but rather to be a gardener, the first and foremost thing that you need to focus on is not making money. That doesn't make you a gardener. To be a gardener, you need to focus on something else, namely the plants, right? So the attention, the purpose of gardening is the plants themselves. And so somewhat paradoxically, the ruler, all forms of ruling, whether it's government, societies, governmental rulers, or even just more like low scale rulers, coaches, parents, even things really low like gardeners, they're all going to find their function or their purpose in lower things, and the things less than themselves. And in one sense less. That sounds really demeaning, but what I mean is in the subjects. And so they are by definition at the service of something else. And what I mean by at the service of something else is that they succeed as rulers, or they succeed as gardeners, or they succeed as parents when they help other things excel on their own, right? So a parent is a good parent when they make their children, or maybe not make their children, but when they help their children be good human beings. That's what makes the parent good, right? So a parent cannot be good unless they make their children good. A gardener cannot be good unless they make their plants good. Likewise, for a political ruler cannot be good unless they make their subjects good, right? So the primary purpose or the goal or the thing that the ruler cares about is something other than themselves. And this is a really kind of a provocative idea at the time in ancient Greece, because it's a fairly common concept that the ruler is the one that everyone else should care about. The ruler isn't a type of servant, but what you get here, very surprisingly, is that the ruler rules by serving others, and that's what makes them excel. This is going to be an image, as we'll see throughout the Republic, an image of what it means to be good in the first place. And this is why the Republic and Plato's thought in general, but especially the Republic and the concept of the good, the form of the good. We'll get to this in great detail down the road. But the form of the good, or what it means to be good, is very central to the early Christian understanding of God. Because what you get is this: to be good is to share your life with another, and this is at the heart of the Trinitarian understanding of God. It's at the heart of what it means to exist. It's to exist for another. So to be good is always, to use the technical phrase, self-diffusive. It always pours itself out into another, and so that its glory, its excellence, is always going to be found in making another good, or to make another excel and to share in a higher life than it otherwise would have been. And so this is why I think also throughout the scriptures you get all these references to the Father is greater than I, but then you also have this, the Father and I are one, and we share everything in common. Everything I have is from the Father. But so I think what you see is that to be a ruler, whether it's a father or whether it's a gardener, is to pour your life into another, and to make that other excel. And therefore, it's going back to what I was just saying. It's contradictory to even talk about a tyrant as a ruler. They're rather a shadow ruler, or they're merely like an false image of a ruler, because they don't really understand what it means to rule in the first place. And so the whole concept of rule, the whole concept of justice, even the whole concept of injustice is completely confused, completely mixed up for them. Okay, and so I think that's one of the more fascinating aspects of this latter part of Book 1 is that you get the idea of justice as the virtue of ruling, and implicit in that is that it's always at the service of another. And so when you think about what's the value of justice, like what do I get out of being just? What do I get out of being moral? You're automatically, I think, missing the point of justice, because you're automatically missing the point of what it means to rule, or what it means to ultimately to be good. Even more broadly, what it means to be godlike. If you think of God as like the divine ruler, if you think of the forms or the gods or a higher power, or however you want to think of it, as this divine providential thing, which you could refer to as the giving providence, giving order to existence. How does that happen? Does that come from the top down, and it kind of these commands that say, okay, all these things are going to do X, Y, and Z at the service of me? I think that's automatically a wrong way of thinking of it, because that would be to think of it through the eyes of tyranny, or through the eyes of a tyrant, to say that God is like a divine tyrant that's making everything serve him. Rather, the other way of conceiving of things, which I think ultimately is Plato's idea, is that to rule is not to order things so that they're at the service of you, but rather to order things so that you're at the service of them being good, that the fact that they can come to thrive through this order. And so it's a really paradoxical thing that what it is to be a ruler is ultimately to be a servant in a type of way. Right. But also the paradox continues, because what it is to be a subject obviously is to be a subject. It's to be subjected to another. But it's also to be a type of ruler. So to be a ruler is to be a subject in a certain sense. And to be a subject, on the other hand, is to also be a type of ruler. Let's just use an example, and then we'll move on to another part of Book 1. But go to the example of the parents and the children, which is a type of relationship that's analogous to ruler and subjects, right? Where you have the parent, which seems to be the ruler over the children, and the question is how do parents, and this is the question that all parents ask. I ask this question almost every day with my wife, figuring out how do we raise our children. It's a very difficult, important question that parents ask, and it's a very puzzling question. It's unclear what parents should do, because all parents who give a little thought to this realize that what's at stake is they don't want to rule their parent, or they don't want to rule their children. Like tyrants. They don't want to see their children like slaves. Children aren't servants. You don't come up with chores for the sake that now you have free labor. You don't think of your children, or you shouldn't think of your children as at the service of you. Rather, the way that a parent should think of how to raise their children is, how do I serve my children so that they can live their own life, so that they can develop and mature, so that they can be their own rulers. They can rule their own lives, be in control of their own lives. One of the things that often happens is, when children aren't raised well, they grow up with bad habits. They grow up not knowing how to control their emotions, not knowing how to control their passions, their desires, and so they lose control of their lives. They're not able to be self-rulers, or they don't have self-mastery, right? Meaning that they lose control of themselves. And so when they're grow up and they're put in situations, whether it's in context of rage, they might do acts of violence, or if it's in the context of lusts, they might ruin their lives because they are unable to control these emotions. And it's not always the case that it's the parents' fault that their children are like that, their grown children are like that. But in many situations, that is a contributing cause, that the parent didn't help the child develop in the right way, so that they would be able to rule themselves. And so, returning to the example, it's once again fairly paradoxical that the parent should give rules, curfews, and that you can't go here at this time, or you can't do these things, things that all children hate. But the reason that parents come up with these rules is not to limit the freedom of their children, but ultimately, in the long run, it's to make or to help their children become free, meaning that they can help their children, be in control of themselves, which is a type of freedom, something that those that don't have, self-control, they lack that, and they become a slave to their passions. They become a slave to their emotions, and they're not free to act in certain ways because they become compelled. And so the rules that parents lay down for their children are ultimately at the service of freedom, not at the service of a loss of freedom. And that's something that's a fine line to walk, but it's something that I think Plato's trying to draw out throughout this first book, especially with the idea of the sheep and the shepherd. It's almost, I mean, it's a really puzzling thing that the sheep don't know what's good for them. Children don't know what's good for them, right? If you ever know anything about 6-year-old boys, they're going to eat as many Airheads and Tootsie Rolls as they can until they throw up. It's not good for them to have free range of their diet. And so the parent lays down certain rules because the child just can't understand why this would not be good for them, or even if they can understand it, they don't have the constraint, they don't have the control of these emotions and these passions yet to be able to control it. So even if they know, yeah, I'll probably throw up if I eat these many Airheads and I drink all this orange soda, the child's still going to do it because they just don't have that type of constraint. And so the parent is here to almost be the willpower for their child when their child's willpower is too weak, or it's not engaged. And I think this is also in the background. This is sort of a tangent, but this is also, I think, in the background of what justifies in a type of epistemic way the permission of infant baptism. It's almost like the parent and godparent make the decision on behalf of the child because the child just isn't mature enough to make that decision for themselves. So if it's permitted to, make your child's decisions about what to eat because you know that they are not capable of making those decisions for themselves, if that's permitted, then it should be permitted to allow for infant baptism for the exact same type of justification. The child doesn't know what's good for themselves, so you make the decision for them. Now, the goal of that ultimately for both those, the sacramental case and just the natural case of the diet of a child, ultimately is that the child comes to see and comes to desire what's actually good for them, and so that the child sees, oh yeah, no, I'm glad my parents made that rule. I'm glad they didn't let me do X, Y, and Z. I would have been on a completely different path. I would be living a completely different life if they let me experiment with drugs, if they let me, just have complete free range. I would not be the type of person I am today. The goal is that at a certain point, the child will come to that realization and maybe even return to the parent and say, thank you for what you did for me at the time. I didn't seem appreciative, but now I understand. Now I have wisdom and knowledge, and I see the good behind the rule that you laid out, and it was at ultimately the service of my well-being, not against it, because most high schoolers think that everything parents do is against their well-being. But that's just because high schoolers aren't wise. It's just, part of what it means to be 16, 17 years old, is that you are sort of self-centered and you're not thinking correctly or well. We've all been there. I know I have. Okay, so that is one, I think, real significant part of this book, as I mentioned. The way it proceeds then is that there's therefore a great value, an intrinsic value to justice, which is hard to comprehend if you're only looking for a specific type of value that is self-serving, right? So if the only value you could give to something is a type of self-serving value, how does this make me better? Then you're going to have a very difficult time understanding the value of being just or the value of being moral, because it's going to seem, what do I get out of this? Just as it would be really hard for the tyrant to see the value of helping the citizens live better lives. It might be hard for the person completely enamored with the thought of a successful business to see the real value, the intrinsic value of, making a good product. Returning to the gardening example, someone might think the only value of raising good tomato plants is because of the money you can get out of it. But if you can't get any money out of it, then where's the real value in it? What's the real point of it? And any hope of finding some intrinsic value for the gardener in raising tomato plants is going to be very very difficult to find or to arrive at. And this is what we're going to get to in the next book, is if there is value to justice, it has to be an intrinsic value, because it looks like all the value that you can get out of, all the extrinsic value you can get out of justice, you could also get by lying and cheating, right? So honor and money and all this stuff that justice might get you, you could get by injustice. You can get by cheating and stealing and lying, and that seems to even be in many cases a better way of getting money. A better way of getting honor is by deception, by lying and cheating. Right? If you're good at that, that's corners you can cut and ways of excelling in those ways. And so, if there's any real value that justice and justice alone can have, it would have to be intrinsic. And so the question of what's the real intrinsic value of morality, or the real intrinsic value of justice, is going to be on the table here, right? So what Socrates is saying is all these other types of rule lead you to this this view, meaning all these other types of rule, like you would rule because you can get something out of it, right? You can get money, or you can get honor, or you can get power, some type of self-gain out of this. Why would you rule if you don't have any self-gain out of this? Why in the world would you do that? Why would you want to be a ruler if you can't get self-gain? One of the things that we're going to see is for many people, there would be no reason. It would be completely pointless. The only point of ruling is that if you can get something, out of it, right? And so, we're going to, have great opportunity to reflect on that. But I want to stop for a second and make a point that I sort of made, but I want to draw it out in a very explicit manner. So the Republic is a book about many things. One thing it's about is about politics. It's about political philosophy, the relation between the ruler and the citizens, what makes for a good ruler, what makes for a good government. But it's also about ethics, or I guess you could call it morality, which is not so much about, right? Ethics is not so much about what actions should I do or shouldn't I do, but rather it's about what type of life should I live? What would be a good way of living? Now, obviously, that question is going to incorporate what actions are good actions or bad actions, but that's always going to be like secondary to this broader question about what type of character I should have. You can, I don't know, maybe think of it in a broader context of like what you want to be a good musician. You don't exactly ask the question, okay, what notes should I play at certain times? that's not like the primary question. If you were simply focused on, okay, what notes should I play? Just tell me the notes to play and I'll play them. That doesn't necessarily make you a good musician. A good musician is someone who knows why you play certain notes at certain times. When the context changes, right? Different music genres, there's like a different feel of the music, and so you play different notes. So to have an understanding, not just of what notes to play, but why you play different notes, and that's going to obviously incorporate, having an understanding of like the different scales, and different scales elicit different moods, right? Minor scales, sort of more melancholic and sad, right? There's a lot, maybe tension. Major scales, there's more sort of calm, more resolution type thing. So to kind of know that, and to be able to have that knowledge in the background, which then is what you use to make your decisions about what notes to play, that's more akin to what ethics is ultimately trying to do. It's not healthy, I think. It's not good to focus on the mere, like, the do's and the don'ts, even though that's important. But the do's and the don'ts, like, it's wrong to do X, Y, and Z. You can't do this, or you have to do this. Those questions, I think, are secondary ethical questions. The primary ethical question is, what type of life is a good life to live, and what type of habits or traits or what type of understanding do you need in order to make those later decisions about what to do. Okay, and so that's why in this class we're not actually going to be, or in this series, we're not actually going to be focusing on like particular actions. Like I'll use examples, but the focus of the Republic, which I think is the focus of ethics, isn't a list of do's and don'ts. It's rather a reflection on the type of life which is good to live, and the types of lives that are not good to live, and then looking at why that's the case. And once you have that in play, the question of what should I do or what shouldn't I do, it just kind of falls out. It's like a fruit of those first former questions. To use an example, it would be like, if you think Christianity was simply about, okay, what should I do and what shouldn't I do, it would be a very legalistic form of Christianity that would almost like entirely miss the reason for being a Christian in the first place, right? No one's a Christian in the first place because they want to follow a set of rules. No one's moral in the first place because they think it's good to follow a set of rules. Following a set of rules doesn't make anyone happy if that's all you're doing. The reason you follow the rules, or the reason you do certain things and you don't do certain things, is what matters, right? It's the source of why you think these rules or these laws are in place. And usually, as I think it's the case with Plato, it's definitely the case in Christianity, it's because of a certain love that you have for something, which is what elicits these rules, because you want to control yourself. You want to kind of bind yourself to what you love. And so you set these rules up in order to bind yourself to what you love with great passion. So if you don't have this love, this great passion for what you love, then the rules are just going to be like dead rules, and it's not going to like mean anything to you. And so it's a sad thing when you find people super concerned about morality, but they're completely at a loss of the love of what lies before morality, which is ultimately the love of something, the love of Christ, or the love of the form of the good for Plato, right? It's that which is what elicits all of these laws, these particular laws. Okay, so that's important to keep in mind. So don't think that what's going to be happening is we're going to be looking at, okay, now we read Plato's Republic, I'm going to be able to answer all these questions about the do's and the don'ts. You can answer those questions, but we're not going to be focusing on that because I, once again, don't think that's the primary heart of what ethics is about. Okay. So here, the last thing I want to talk about before we wrap this up, finish up book one, is this discussion of injustice and what injustice does for us. Injustice has internal consequences. Injustice has intrinsic effects. So much so that it like undermines itself. Like injustice even becomes thwarted when it's like it's enacted. And here's what I mean. So this is on page 31 of the Reeves translation. This is around 351D, somewhere around there, right before 351D in the margin numbers. I'll just read some of this again. Okay. So Socrates says, actually, let me set this up. Actually, no, let's just jump in. Okay, so Socrates says, "You are doing well at it too. So please me some more by answering this question." So here's a question that Socrates is asking Thrasymachus. Do you think that a city, an army, a band of robbers or thieves, or any other group with a common unjust purpose, so think of like band of thieves, these people that are set out to do unjust things. Their goal is to lie, to cheat, and to steal for their own gain, right? So we're going to gain, we're going to excel by stealing from this person, by killing this person, by lying, by deceiving, right? Do you think that group that has this unjust purpose, to continue where Socrates is speaking, with a common unjust purpose, would be able to achieve that purpose, if its members were unjust to each other? So the question is, do you think that a group of unjust people, or no, put it this way, do you think that a group of people with an unjust purpose could achieve that purpose if they were unjust to each other? And then Thrasymachus says, of course not. Socrates goes on, what if they were not unjust to one another? Would they achieve more? Thrasymachus says, certainly. So this is really fascinating. It looks like in order to achieve the purposes of injustice, right, in order to execute your plan to rob a bank, in order to execute your plan to commit a murder with a group of people, in order to execute your plan to lie to this group of people, to deceive them in a certain way, in order for that to be done and to be done well, the group itself cannot be unjust to each other, because otherwise once like the backstabbing happens, that common goal that they have is going to start to fall apart, right? So it's kind of like the classic movie where you have this group of thieves. Usually it's movies about like art thieves or something, or bank robbers where they're robbing banks, but it's the fact that they all kind of get overly greedy, that their greed causes the group to fall apart, and then it causes them to get caught, right? Once they become enemies to themselves, once the group of friends of bank robbers becomes enemies to each other, the whole thing falls apart, and everyone sort of loses, right? And so they can't even execute their unjust plans when they are unjust to each other. So the lesson that Socrates is trying to draw out of this is, it looks like even injustice needs justice in order to be executed, which is paradoxical, but it kind of makes sense, right? You can kind of think about this, that in order to execute an unjust plan with a bunch of people, you have to have some amount of control and restraint among the members of that. And so you can think about this even within the context of an individual, right? Rather than a group of people, think about yourself as a group of like emotions and passions, right? You got all these competing, all these, parts of you, your desire to do one thing, the fear that you have of doing this, the emotions that accompany that, all the memories you might have, and all these things that kind of come together. What you need is to have some amount of control over all of those if you're going to, execute some horrendous action. So if you ever read Crime and Punishment, it's a wonderful novel about this axe murderer. It's a novel by Fyodor Dostoevsky. So I highly recommend you reading Crime and Punishment. I've actually had my ethics classes read this book alongside The Republic. But in this novel, there's this axe murderer. I'm not giving away anything, so don't worry, because great books are things that you can never spoil. Even if you know what happens, you still don't spoil it. So there's this axe murderer who's, planning on committing this murder, this axe murder, to make himself an axe murderer, right? And so, but he has to fight against all of these things that are kind of pulling against him, saying, no, don't do that. Today we call this conscience, right? Your conscience is saying, don't do it. Some other things inside you are saying, do it. It's kind of the classic, the two angels on your shoulder, you're feeling split. In order to do this action, what he has to do is he has to kill one of these sides, right? He's got to have complete, unity, oneness of mind. His whole self has to be directed towards this action if he's going to execute it. And so you could think of, in order to do something, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, you have to be of one mind. If you're of kind of a split mind, it's going to get in the way, right? You're going to have a difficult time doing that action. And so this is why right after this, Socrates goes on to talk about the effects of injustice. What that does is it does this. Socrates says, because, Thrasymachus, injustice causes factions, divisions, like splits. It causes hatreds and quarrels among them, while justice brings about friendship and a sense of common purpose. Isn't that so? Thrasymachus says, yes, it does. Right? Socrates goes on, you are still doing well on that front, which is very good of you. So tell me this, if the function of injustice is to produce hatred wherever it occurs, so what injustice does is it like by definition makes for like division, right? Injustice automatically causes factions or divisions, which is the type of like hatred, right? If injustice produces hatred, whether it's of another or even of yourself, right? If the injustice is internal to you, you feel this like self-hatred. Okay, Socrates goes on, then whenever it arises, whether among freemen or slaves, won't it make them hate one another, form factions, and be unable to achieve any common purpose? Thrasymachus says, of course. And so what happens is when you have two people that are at odds with each other, that are unjust, they hate each other, they find themselves apart from each other, they have different goals, they have different purposes. So the function of injustice, or what injustice does, is it splits apart. It splits people apart, and if it's intrinsic injustice, if it's within the context of an individual, what injustice does is it splits you apart. You become sort of this like split personality. You live this double life. One part of you says, don't do this. The other part of you says, do this. And you feel torn, right? And so the notion of feeling like you're living a double life, or the notion of feeling like you're split, that's the result of injustice. And so what it does, he goes on, is it makes you unable to really do an action, because you're always going to be feeling that every action you make is the wrong action, because part of you says do it, the other part of you says don't do it. So anything you come to decide on is always going to feel like it's the wrong thing. So the thing about injustice, which you could think of as immorality, is it makes you uneasy with yourself, so that everything you do seems like it's the wrong thing, right? Whether it's literally doing the right action, if you're unjust, you're gonna find it boring. You're gonna find it unfulfilling. It's gonna seem like it's the wrong action. Or if you do, the unjust thing, on the other hand, you're gonna feel like it's the wrong thing to do. You shouldn't have done that. There's gonna be some sort of like self-loathing. And so the idea, I think, what Socrates is proposing is what injustice is it's this thing where it's this state of always feeling like you've done the wrong thing because you're at war with yourself. You're an enemy to yourself, as he goes on to say at the bottom of page 31, 352a. He says, second of all, what injustice does is it makes an enemy to itself, and that what is in every way its opposite, namely justice. So when you live when you live in an unjust way, or when you do acts of injustice, you become an enemy to yourself. And that is, I think, something that we've all experienced. No one likes that. No one wants to feel like they're always doing the wrong thing. Right? So maybe you've cheated on a test in college. Maybe you got away with it, but you kind of maybe felt guilty about that, or you felt wrong, or you felt like, I don't know, deep down you felt stupid because you knew you didn't know the answers to these questions. You knew you didn't work hard enough to actually do it on your own. Deep down, you kind of wish that you could have known these answers. You wish you were the type of person that could study harder. You wish you were the type of person that didn't have to cheat. So even when you get away with things, you still feel like you didn't get away with it because you yourself have caught yourself, right? I mean, it's like, yeah, the teacher didn't catch you, the police didn't catch you, but there was a part of your very soul, this part of your very self, which you might think of as like your conscience. That is not something that you've run away from, or you haven't, at least at that point, because you still feel like someone caught you, something caught you. What was it? It was your own conscience. And so in that situation, you can do one of two things. You can, or actually three things. One, you can just continue to live this tension between, I want to do this, but I can't, and you always feel like you're stuck between doing the right thing and the wrong thing. The other option is to try to be of one mind, try to be of like one single purpose, right? And so that you might think, okay, should I be the type of person that cheats, or should I be the type of person that doesn't cheat? One of you, if you're going to feel at ease with your life, if you're going to feel sort of content, like I've made the right decision, you're going to have to choose one or the other. You can't live both lives, right? You can't live the life of an honest person and a dishonest person. You can't live the life of a just person and an unjust person. You can't serve two masters. And so what you can do is you can either kill the part of you that is unjust, or you can kill the part of you that is just. You can kill your passions, or you can kill your reason, which is ultimately, according to Socrates, the part that's kind of like your conscience. It's the part that knows better. The passions, it's the part that just says, no, it doesn't feel better to do it. So, right. So you have these two kind of opposing parts. Anytime your alarm goes off at 5 a.m, you've had this war between reason and passion. Passion says, you're really tired, sleep in. Reason says, no, you got to get up because you got to catch the airplane flight. right? You have these competitions inside of you between what you know is good, but what doesn't feel good. And so what you can do if you don't want to live a torn, split life is you could put one of those parts in conformity with the other. So either make reason try to conform to your passions so that reason becomes a slave to the passions, or you could make it the other way. You could make the passions a servant of, a subject of reason. And so what justice ultimately is, it's the virtue of ruling. So it's about taking subjects and making them at the service of the ruling part. But once again, paradoxically, how that happens is when reason spends its time focusing on, helping the subjects excel. And so the way that this is going to happen in individuals is you have to train your emotions, you have to train your passions if you're going to be of one mind. It doesn't just happen overnight with a snap of your fingers and signing a piece of paper. You don't then automatically become a good person, right? A good person isn't something that you just say you want to be. A good person is someone who's taken their passions, taken their whole self, and ordered it at the service of something, so that there's only one ruler of their life, and not this faction or this split, which is what injustice brings about, and therefore you're kind of torn. And so one way to kind of wrap all this up, one way to think of what Book 1 is doing is it's trying to say justice is a virtue that brings about unity. Justice brings about a type of unity. It makes you of one mind towards what you ought to be one mind about. And what injustice does is it splits you, and it makes you ruled by many different things. And once you're ruled by many different things, there's nothing that kind of, orders it all. And so there's going to be a type of fight. There's going to be a type of war going on, whether the war is going on in society, in the state, if you're speaking about this communally or politically, or the war is going to be going on in your soul, if you're speaking about this individually or ethically, right? Everyone knows that they've felt this inner turmoil, this inner friction, this war that they're having with themselves. Is sometimes how we describe it. And so what justice is it's the virtue that you would get that would do away with that, so that you don't feel that inner turmoil, you don't feel that inner self-hatred, but rather you feel like everything about you, from your decisions to eat, your decisions to drink, your decisions to make jokes, your decisions to have sex, your decisions to read books, your decisions to play instruments, your decisions to listen to podcasts, all of those decisions are going to be ordered towards the exact same thing. So it's not like, on these issues, this is what rules me, and on these other issues, this other thing is what rules me. No, the just person is the person that has one master, the person that has one ruler, and therefore you feel like you belong. You feel like you have a single purpose, and that's what Plato, at the very end of Book 1, describes as, therefore the just person is a happy person, the person that feels like there's a single purpose. They feel like they belong. They feel like they're at home with themselves, whereas the unjust person always feels like they're not at home with themselves. Okay, and so what you get is justice is always more profitable than injustice, Socrates seems to say, because we've all know what this means. What it means to be unjust is basically to be unhappy. It's to be at war with yourself. It's to hate yourself. To be just is to feel at home. It's to be of one mind. It's to feel like you don't have anything to hide. It's to feel like you're not, on these hours of the day I live this type of life, and then in public I live this other type of life. But rather, the just person is the person who says, no, I only live one life, regardless of the time, regardless of who I'm around, regardless of what I'm doing. I have one single purpose. And everyone knows that there's something more fulfilling about that, because it's more peaceful. It's more, it seems to be more desirable than to be at war with oneself. And so that's where book one ends. It's this realization that justice brings that about. That's what the value of justice is. It's to bring about that state of inner harmony, inner peace. And now here's the great problem. Socrates, nowhere in book one, ever really, really said what justice was. He just said what it does, right? He just said, here's what justice does for you. Here's what injustice would do for you. He's never really come to this, okay, so what is it? And how do you get it? How do you become just? And what is justice? And so this is why at the very end, you get this beautiful description, and this we'll end with this. I'll just quote this at the very end. The last thing Socrates says. Thrasymachus says, "Let that be your banquet, Socrates, at the feast of Bendis." Remember, this whole discussion, the whole Republic, was Socrates' attempt to come down from Athens to the Piraeus to attend this feast of the goddess of Bendis. And so Thrasymachus is making this play like, okay, look, you've had your feast now. And what Socrates responds is this. "Given by you, Thrasymachus, after you became gentle with me and ceased to be difficult. Yet I have not had a good banquet." So there's something about what just happened that Socrates is very unsatisfied with. He doesn't like where he ended up here. Even though a lot of wonderful things were said, a lot of things he said are very important, but he's nevertheless unhappy. He doesn't feel fully satisfied. And here's why. "But that is my fault, not yours. I seem to have behaved like those gluttons who snatch at every dish that passes and taste it before having properly savored the preceding one, before finding the first thing we inquired about, namely what justice is. I let that go and turned to investigate whether it is a kind of vice and ignorance or a kind of wisdom and virtue." Right? So he never really focused on the question what justice is, merely whether justice is wisdom. Does justice require wisdom? Does justice require virtue, or is it a type of virtue? He focuses on that, never this like, so tell me really what it is, right? He goes on, "Then an argument came up about injustice being more profitable than justice, and I could not refrain from abandoning the previous one and following up on that. Hence, the result of the discussion so far, as I am concerned, is that I know nothing." Right? So Socrates comes to this great realization that in regards to ethics, in regards to what would make for a good ruler, what would make for a happy society, a happy individual life, regardless of whether you're talking about social, political justice, or individual, like ethical justice, he says, "Look, I know nothing. I know nothing about this, about what would make for a happy life, whether political or ethical." And that's because he doesn't know what justice is, right? And if you don't know what it is, then you can't manifest it. You can't realize it. He goes on. This is how book one finishes up. "For when I do not know what justice is, I will hardly know whether it is a kind of virtue or not, or whether a person who has it is happy or unhappy." Right? And then it ends that way. And so the idea is, look, in the broad scheme, we can know that justice makes you happy. But if you don't know what it really is, then you don't know which particular things you need to have, or which particular ways of living you need to be in order to be happy. right? So it's kind of like, oh, you can know that you have to study calculus in order to be smart in calculus. You can know that's the case, but that doesn't make you actually smart in calculus. You need to actually study the details of what that is that needs to be studied, right? So you can know that you need to be just in order to be happy. But if you don't know what justice is, then you're not happy, right? Same thing about the gardening case. You know that you need to take care of your plants if you're going to be a good gardener. But if you don't know what in particular you need to do, then you're not going to be a good gardener. Okay, and so book one doesn't exactly answer the question that we raised, namely, what is justice? How does it make you happy? Do you really need it to make you happy? We didn't answer that question in the way that like would satisfy us, because we only answered it in this broad picture, this broad spectrum way, not in the precise detailed way. Okay, and so it's to that question that the rest of the Republic is going to turn. It's going to kind of hone in on more of the details of what are we looking for when we're looking for justice? What are we looking for when we're looking for the virtues that would make someone a good ruler, either over other people or over themselves? And so that's what we're going to look at next time in Book 2.